So the sharp-eyed amongst you will have noticed that last time, when I did the clown video, there were a few pieces of terrain in there that I didn't show how to build, and now I'm going to show how to build them. First one I'm doing here is a sign, and that's really simple. It is just craft sticks cut into shape, filed down so the edges are smooth, and stuck together. Using wood glue would have worked fine, but I was in a hurry, and super glue and accelerant works just as well. Get a little base to stick it on, find a little crow friend to sit on it, and fill in the gaps in the base because you didn't have a slot of base and had to carve it yourself. Anyways, what Fairground is complete without some sort of notice board that you can paste signs onto. Once again, this is craft sticks or popsicle sticks, and once again I've found some slotted bases, this time actually properly slotted bases, to fit it into. Now the one complicated one, really, the first two being fairly simple builds, honestly, tents. You start these with a little sort of box made out of foam board and use toothpicks to make a sloped sort of support for the roof. I ended up cutting some little pieces of chipboard to further support the roof, and connecting those toothpicks together at the top with some copper wire, which I'll just paint to look like rope later, it'll be fine. A little bit of hot glue as well, of course, to hold those in place because they were trying to come out the top and we couldn't have that. Now, I knew that I was going to send these along to Fiverr to be clown goblin circus terrain, and I did want the tents to reflect that, so rather than doing a sort of smooth outer covering for the tents to look like canvas, I tore up some strips of paper and glued those to it, reasoning that the irregular chunks and rough edges of the strips of paper would make them look a bit like cured leather hides. These did take a little bit to get them all stuck down, and this was kind of a messy step. It took me a little bit to figure out what the best way was to get these stuck down, and you can see I put some parchment paper down, and I'm glad I did, because otherwise I'd have white glue all over my desk. Then they needed to have just a little bit of extra detail, so I made sort of a tent flap door here with another strip of paper and a toothpick. And that's actually it for the builds, and it was on to painting. Now, the wooden bits with the craft sticks, I didn't want to have to, paint wood texture on those, and the wood texture that is on them will look pretty decent if you can just let it show through. And so I painted these using heavily watered down inks. Crow Friend got a coating of black contrast paint and a dot of red eyes, though I don't think I show that in the footage. And then we did some freehand, of course, for lettering on the signs. This ended up not looking perfect with just red paint. It was a little bit hard to read. So what I actually ended up doing was bringing out the trusty Micron pen and doing a simple drop shadow effect on the lettering, and that made them a lot more legible. I could probably have just done the lettering with the Micron pen in the first place and had black lettering, but I kind of liked the fun sort of circusy nature of having the red. Now, the signboard I did need to paint, so I did actually spray prime that one, and you can see that the wood texture on the craft sticks does still show through a little bit. And this piece of chipboard here I wanted to look kind of like a corkboard, and that was easily achieved with just a bit of dry brush. But the transparent inks came back out over top of that brown, so that once again we would get to see the definition of the wood texture from the craft sticks, with the heavily pigmented inks kind of seeping into the cracks and crevices, of which it turns out wood has quite a few. Now, making little posters, I grabbed another piece of paper and just cut it into appropriately sized pieces with my scissors. You can kind of eyeball these to be about the right size. They don't need to be even, they don't need to be all the same. It's little pieces of paper on a notice board. Once you got kind of a sufficient number of those, you can just start sticking them down with some white glue. I decided to stick mine down before doing the lettering on them in order to save myself a little bit of time, Filling that in with a micron pen, of course, there would not be a tremendous amount of point to filling in the bits behind it. But I did do a few different layers. I decided that first one wasn't quite enough, and I wanted to have a layered effect on these. Like this board had been around for a little while and people had stuck down different things to them. Then I weathered up the pages with a little bit more ink, and you can see on the right hand side that I used far too much ink on those ones while I was figuring out how to do it. The tents ended up being pretty good, I think. Pretty interesting way to paint these, starting with the brown so that when I do the kind of slapdash goblin paint job over the top, doing stripes, some of this brown base will still show through, and it will look like it is a sort of stretched hide leather tent that goblins painted over top of, which was, of course, the whole point. I did find that there was not enough definition on the strips of paper in the beginning, and so a little bit of my homemade wash here, just around the edges, really soaked into the paper and helped define those individual pieces. Then the stripes, I painted these on using yellow, I think, on both of the tents, because yellow's a nice bright color. Bright primary colors will often look very circus-y if you're going for a circus. Or you could, Fairground. Lots and lots of bright primary colors will feature. Yellow, of course, needing a couple of coats to properly cover, but I did most of this with stippling so that, once again, it would look irregular and slapdash and like it was done by goblins. If you were making a tent painted by, humans, then you might want to be a little bit more precise with your brush strokes, but the quick and dirty nature of these suited me just fine and ended up looking pretty good on the project. The door got one solid color, mostly because I was worried that if I did the door in stripes as well, it wouldn't show up as much. I wanted it to be obvious which part of the tent was the front. I felt that was kind of important, and so the little tent flap is only one color. The blue is a much stronger pigment than yellow, and you definitely will not need as many coats of this to cover well. I did still use a sort of lighter color to highlight it and add a little bit of variation using some stippling, but yeah, you can definitely get away with maybe 1 or 2 coats of blue as opposed to the yellow where you'll probably need 2 or 3. I think that adding this extra line of paint down the center of the stripes really helps these pop. Often in miniature painting, being accurate to the way things would look is not as important as having an extra layer of contrast. And I don't just mean Games Workshop's paint line here, although those are a quick and easy way to achieve that sort of effect using just one paint instead of 2. Maybe not as good as using 2, but in the end, they're your minis. Paint them how you want. So the rope and a few other things just got a little bit of brown to help them stand out from the wood, and that was it for the painting, really. This was a super fast, super simple, super easy project. You can knock these pieces of scatter terrain out really fast. Couple of afternoons, and you'd have a whole army's worth of tents for your minis to hide in. You can make a couple of little signposts. Oh, and here you will, of course, note that I didn't bother doing any basing material on the little round base because I did send these off to Fiverr for the Clown Goblin army, and I expect that they would want to do the same basing scheme so that they would match up with the rest of the army. All in all, though, really fast, really easy project. Add a little bit of fun variety to your table, whether it's for war games, or these would actually be great for role-playing games too. That's it for me, quick one today. I've been Destro, you've been great. See you next time.